Welcome to 위대한 수업, The Great Minds. I'm James Cameron, and I'm a filmmaker, and I'm an explorer. I think it might have something to do with the fact that my first role model was Jacques Cousteau, who was an explorer, but he was also a filmmaker. Some would even say he was a filmmaker first, and he used the filmmaking to do his exploration. So I was inspired by that. But also as a science fiction fan, I didn't distinguish between whether it was in a comic book or whether it was in a novel, a pulp novel, or a science fiction magazine, or whether it was at the movies. I just loved movies. I loved the transport from my normal mundane life to some amazing place, some amazing time, some amazing other world. And of course I love science fiction. I like monsters, I like spaceships, I like robots, all that stuff. So, of course, it was a steady diet of monsters and spaceships and robots. You know, I didn't really catch up with the fact that there was this whole other area of cinema that didn't involve fantasy until later, that was storytelling across all aspects of the human experience. You know, and that was an awakening for me a little bit later in life, in my late teens, my early 20s, and school, at college, and so on, really learning a bit of the history of film and the aesthetics of film and so on, and film as storytelling, film as the universal human experience. You know, but at the time, I was just voracious for any kind of film or television that was science fiction. And back in my really formative years as a kid and as a young teen, it was Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Lost in Space and The Outer Limits, and obviously Star Trek, right? So this was a moment in history where television and media in general had sort of discovered science fiction and the fact that they could make money with it, right? So all these things were happening kind of in the 60s and 70s that were just inputting into my mind, and I would just churn it around, and all of a sudden my own stories started to kind of show up. And I was an avid artist. I could actually draw fairly well, and I love comic books. So it wasn't a big leap to start drawing my own comic. But I wasn't really drawing comics. I was kind of drawing what today would be called a graphic novel or a storyboard. So all of a sudden I find myself trying to express myself novelistically, but in frames, in pictures. And it kind of teaches you, I mean, emulating comic book artists, but it teaches you how to tell a story in a series of pictures. Close-up, wide shot, moving shot, action, fast cutting, many frames per page versus a few. You know, all of the vocabulary of film is there in comic books and graphic novels. And so that was my training. Now, meanwhile, as a lover of cinema, I'm starting to think, well, I wonder how you do this. And one of the big light bulb moments for me was watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. Of course, you know, big space fan, right? Big fantasy fan, science fiction. So I was the first one in line to see 2001: A Space Odyssey when it was released in the summer of 1968. And nobody had ever seen anything like that before. It's a very opaque film. It's very difficult to understand. The storytelling there's a very high aesthetic value to it, but it wasn't standard storytelling. And it just kind of blew the doors off of everything I had seen before. And it awakened a young mind. You know, I was 16, I think, something like that. And all of a sudden, you know, two things happened. One, as I realized film could be art. What a concept. It could just be pure pictures. It didn't have to have a lot of dialogue, you know. And there was this thing called music that went with the pictures. I mean, I had obviously watched hundreds, if not thousands, of movies by then and TV shows, but I was never aware of the music. All of a sudden, here were just pictures and music, and it was such an epiphany for me of what cinema could be. At the same time, I was seeing images I couldn't comprehend how they were made. I just didn't get it, and I wanted to know. Interesting thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey is that it had a big, thick book that was published on how it was made. And they didn't do that back then. It's obviously common practice in the decades since. But that was one of the first films that had a big, thick book on how it was made, actual chapter and verse, technically, how that movie was made. So I absorbed all that, once again, that young sponge mind, and then I had to start doing it. You know, once again, it's that cognitive toggle from being a fan and an appreciator into taking action. And so if you get anything else from this, if you want to do something, go do it.